A couple of years ago, I made a video called the top 7 hardest to keep saltwater fish, and the number 1 fish on that list was the Moorish Idol. But this week I bought one for my Red Sea Reefer S-850, so today I'll tell you why I've bought him, what I'm going to do to keep him healthy and eating well, and I'll give you an update on how the tank is going in general. First off then, why do Moorish Idols have a reputation for poor survivability in aquariums? Well, historically people couldn't work out what to feed them because they're reported to only eat sponges in the wild. And in fact in 2008 there was an article in Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine in which the author said he'd studied 382 Moorish Idols kept in aquariums, none of whom had survived. But I've seen a couple of videos in the recent past featuring Elliot from Marine Collectors, who I would describe as something of an expert in the field of difficult to keep fish. And his advice is that they need a high fibre diet with plenty of nori, which means you can't just feed them things like mysis shrimp that are high in protein and low in fibre. So I've picked up some nori sheets, seaweed pellets, the 2 highest fibre content pellet foods I could find, and finally Ocean Nutrition Angel formula, which contains sponges. Now I'm not necessarily expecting this to be easy, and I'll still consider this an expert only fish until I'm proven otherwise. And as if feeding difficulty isn't enough, I've spoken to a few reef keepers who've had Moorish Idols who have gone on to eat their corals. So this is very much a risky fish and not one I'd encourage you to take on lightly. Quite simply, my plan is to feed him heavily for as long as I can. So far he's not showing an interest in nori, but he does pay attention to the seaweed pellets and goes crazy for the 2 high fibre pellets as well as the angelfish formula. Now I will of course keep you updated with how I get on with him over time, but in the meantime I'm open to suggestions for names for him. The more ridiculous the better, and bonus points for puns. Turning to the tank overall then, and things have moved on a lot since my last update 6 weeks ago. The cycle completed shortly after my last video, which meant it was time to move over my fishing corals from my water box tank. Now I'd normally go much slower adding fish to a new tank, but that wasn't a problem for me given I was also moving over several kilos of long established live rock. Now before I moved the rock across, I needed to trim 2 branches off the front of this rock so it would fit nicely in the new tank. And that proved to be much harder than I anticipated. I started with a handsaw that was completely useless before moving on to a drill with a tile drill bit. That did take quite a lot of work still, but eventually it did the job and I managed to avoid doing any major damage to any of my corals. The new rock went into the tank nice and easy, and after I transferred the rock, I left it in place for a few weeks while I went away on holiday. And when I returned, everything was doing well, so it was time to add the rest of my fish. Now when I shut down my last tank a few months ago, Ryan from Prestige Reef very kindly offered to look after all of my fish for me. He's had them for about 3 months now and they're all looking super healthy, so Ryan, thank you for doing such a great job. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to keep all my little wet pets. Now it's made a huge difference having a tank full of fish, and it's really brought the system to life. However, I haven't had things all my own way and I have had a few issues early on. The rock I used for my scape leached phosphate, and my phosphate levels peaked at 1.3 parts per million before I moved the corals over. I used Blue Life Phosphate RX to deal with the worst of it, and now my phosphate is down to around 0.25. I've switched over to GFO in the form of Nios PhosX to get it closer to 0.1 parts per million, which is where I want it to be. My other filtration is the Bubble King skimmer, which I'm getting more and more impressed with as time goes on, and of course the Red Sea Reef Mat 1200 that is turning nice and brown and helping to take the edge off my nutrients and keep my water nice and clear. And the only equipment on the tank that I'm not completely happy with is the MP40 power heads. They provide plenty of flow, but they really struggle to grip on 19mm glass, and I've found them slid halfway down the tank on 2 occasions so far, so I'm considering whether I should replace them at some point, maybe when my budget permits. As to water chemistry, my calcium and magnesium were very low at first, and I've now brought my calcium up from 350 parts per million to 420, and my magnesium is now at 1100, up from as low as 900. The magnesium is still far too low, but it'll be back up to around 1350 in the next week or 2, at which point I'll be happy. To take care of dosing, I did originally buy the new Red Sea Reef Care dosing system, but I've since decided that that's better used when your parameters are roughly where they should be and not all over the place like mine were. The whole point of the Reef Care program is that the bottles get used up at the same time because you dose them in set ratios according to your calcium uptake. But given I was dosing lots of calcium, tons of magnesium and no alkalinity, it doesn't currently make sense for me to use this stuff, so for now I've switched to Reef's Elements pH Plus along with some DIY magnesium that I mixed up myself. And the only other thing to tell you about is the frag tank that I've now set up in the sump extension. I'm using an AI Blade Grow and a Nero 5 powerhead that I had left over when I broke down my water box tank. Now I think that's all I'll need in terms of equipment, and for now I just have a few Zoas in here anyway, along with a piece of Space Invader pectinia that I snapped off when I was drilling my water box rock. Now I may eventually need a fish and some cleanup crew in here to deal with algae, but that's very much future Alex's problem, and for now I'll just have the light on nice and low to minimise any algae growth. As to the lights on my main display tank, I haven't quite finished dialing them in yet. I have them running at 20% or less for now, which is giving me part of less than 100, and I've taken my time to build the lights up slowly to avoid any photosynthetic pests taking over. I did have a very small diatom outbreak, but it disappeared after about a week, and the lack of ugly stage is definitely in part due to me running my lights nice and low, at least for now. But by the next video I should have my lights at the intensity I want them, and I'll be aiming for a peak part of around 150. I'm really happy with the lights so far. The Red Sea Reef LEDs give fantastic shimmer, and the blades make the tank fluoresce very nicely indeed in the evening, which is exactly what I was after. But again, I'll report back properly in due course when I've been using them a little longer. So now you're up to speed with all the developments on my Red Sea Reefer S-850. I will of course keep you updated on how the Moorish Idol gets on and how the tank does generally, so if you want more of that, make sure you like and subscribe, and until next time, happy reefing.